Do you work on a project that is a delight, where you can easily make changes quickly and with no fear, or is it a bit trickier than that? Do you have a long production process with lots of quality control hoops to jump through and demands for more and more features being added all of the time, but as your software is still getting harder and harder to work on, making integration and releases more and more complicated as it grows? Do you get lots of bugs in production and only find out weeks or months after a change that it broke your software? Do you have the freedom to improve things, or do you have to wait for permission from someone after every change to your software or improvement to your development process? If you work in an organisation like that, how on earth did it get there? And how do you get out of this seemingly impossible position? Or does it all just seem too hopeless? In this video, I'll share my experience of working with just such an organisation and how they found a route out of this mess with continuous delivery, moving from not being able to release software at all to releasing changes every week. If you want to learn how to make these changes where you work, or stop them from happening in the first place, then keep listening. I've got a special offer for you later on. Hi, I'm Dave Farley of Continuous Delivery. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, please do hit subscribe. And if you enjoy the content today, hit like as well. Let me pause here to say thanks to our sponsors. We're fortunate to be sponsored by Equal Experts, Tricentis, Transfic and Ice Panel. All of these companies offer products and services that are well aligned with the topics that we discuss on this channel here every week. So if you're looking for excellence in continuous delivery and software engineering, click on the links in the description below to check them out. At the start of a new piece of work, it's an unavoidable fact that we know the least that we're ever going to know about it. After all, it's a problem that we haven't solved yet. We don't even know any of the things that we need to know to create a plan at this stage. The big looming snake pit of a trap here is the illusion of rigour, the idea that we can come up with a good plan that will define the work and how we will approach it. This is where, to my eyes, a form of madness seems to creep in. At the point when we know the least we will ever know, we create a plan for how to do everything. Well, at this stage I already don't fancy our chances much, do you? We can start with the best will in the world. We may know that plans never survive first contact with the enemy, but there are lots of quotes about planning and you can pick the one that fits your thinking. My impression of most organisations is that they prefer this one. Failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. But preparation is not the same thing as deciding what Alice or Bob will be doing in 6 months' time. Deciding on things that you'd like to learn before you progress further is also good preparation. Here's another project management quote. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Preparation is about doing things to make the job easier, not planning each cut of the tree in detail. There's also this from The Hobbit. It does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near to one. In software, we live pretty close to some fairly grumpy dragons. This may sound like I'm talking about the start of a grand new development project, but all of this is just as true for a new feature if that feature is more than a few days of work. And certainly true of the annual or semi-annual budget rounds that are common in big companies. It seems naive to me to expect plans like these to be accurate. We don't and can't know all that we need to do to come up with an accurate plan for things like this. On the other hand, some sense of direction is good, but we don't necessarily need or can know even that with any degree of accuracy from the start. So leaving our options open so that we can change our approach, our priorities, or even our target destination is not only wise, but in reality essential for solving complicated problems, where the steps aren't obvious and are always likely to change as we learn more. Doing work to allow us to learn and change our minds is a wise course of action. Checking our progress after each small step and the continued validity of our current preferred destination is also very sensible. So now, if we have fallen into the snake pit, we'll have come up with a grand if illusory plan. Now we're on the path to all kinds of trouble. Our product ideas are almost certainly wrong, and the bigger the plan, the more the pressure to skim over the details, and the more the likelihood that we'll think of changes to the plan as bad things, instead of as the inevitable consequence of learning which they represent. We will probably be a bit lazy too and sketch out our vague wishes for product ideas, then ask the development teams for accurate estimates and hold them to it. This is sadly more common than seems at all sensible to me. Every book on project management that I've ever seen says that you can't fix time and scope. And yet, the vast majority of organisations that I've ever seen try to fix time and scope. Let me remind you of where we are. We've just fixed time and scope, and we haven't done any real work yet at all on the new idea. We don't know if the technology will work. We don't know if the design makes sense. We may not know if the team is organised properly. We don't know if our ideas make commercial sense, or if our customers or users actually care about them or will find them useful at all. But we do have a plan, and that now feels hard to change. The problem with plans like this is that it's human nature to gloss over complexity and to ignore the dragons. Until they start biting us, that is. So our plan is over-optimistic, always, every time. You'd think that we'd learn from this, but we often don't seem to. Estimates are problematic because all of the pressure, real and imagined, is on us to underestimate. Early on, we have a sketchy, overly simplistic view of the problem. Oh yeah, that's easy. Later, as we get further and further in, we start finding out all of the things that we didn't think of. Some of them might be dragons. Now there's lots more work to do that we never allowed for in our estimates or our plans. When someone asks us how long will it take, we all know that what they'd really like to hear from us is no time at all. So even if we are grizzled veterans of lots of failed estimates, we still like to be liked, or like to get the job, or like to be seen as one of the good team players. So as well as not seeing the complexity, we're also a bit tempted to downplay it. But we aren't completely stupid, so we also like our plans to be vaguely real at least. Most experienced people that I know say that they usually double the estimates that they first think of. The problem is that the data says that estimates at this stage of a project, before we've actually started doing any work, are out by a factor of 4. So doubling only gets you halfway there. And if you did multiply by 4, you'd never get the job in the first place, and you'd be treated as the grumpy person in the corner. The other ludicrous pressure at this point is for people to move on. The people specifying the need are often busy and important people, so they can't spend all of their valuable time agonising over every last detail. The trouble with working in small steps is that it requires constant involvement of people with a vision for the product. Extreme programming called this customer on the team. You can't realistically throw a meaningful product vision over a wall because, as I said, that vision is going to change. And if it doesn't change as we learn more things, we aren't doing a good enough job of learning. So back in the irrational world, what these busy experts really want is to define the vision quickly with the least amount of effort and then move on to something new and presumably more important. Then they'd like to come back later at the agreed date and collect the perfectly realised implementation of their perfect vision and take all the plaudits. The problem here is that in the real world their vision was flawed, not detailed enough, missed some dragons, and we misunderstood it. In the irrational world then, it makes sense to organise these projects as bigger things. So our experts can feel justified in providing just the rough sketches and throwing them over the wall without feeling too guilty. So when we talk about a plan, what we really mean here is a plan for usually months or years worth of work. Plans like these are expensive, so now we need to do all sorts of extra work to sanity check them. After all, we don't want to be wasting millions on some stupid idea. So we need to do lots more work on the plan to make sure that it's more accurate. And since they're never accurate, let's make lots of bureaucratic rules and hurdles to try and make them more precise instead of being more accurate. Does this picture seem familiar yet? There are lots of death spirals open to us now. One of them is what my friend Dan Terhurst North calls the infinite fractal coastline of estimation. The closer we look, the more detail we see. The bigger the project looks, the scarier it gets. The more process we add, oh no, here are more things we hadn't thought about, and so on. The other is the lure of bureaucracy. As the project gets bigger and more expensive, the more we want to be able to confirm that we aren't taking too many silly risks. So we put more gates into the process. All of these things take more work and more people. And as soon as we add more people, there are overheads. This is a law of ever diminishing returns, at least for creative things like product and software development. So now we're going to need more bureaucracy to coordinate the work of all of these people. And inevitably, there will be more work involved in this, so the project gets bigger once again. So now we've got this enormous months or years long plan for our product. There's an enormous amount of work and a very long wait for anything to come out of the other end. Now our organisation is structured around these enormous, inflexible, inefficient processes. And we learn to adapt to them. One of the ways that we adapt to them is to make sure that we load up every project with everything that we can think of. Everything that we can imagine ever possibly wanting, every bell and whistle. Because if we don't get everything in right now, and we're not getting stuff very often, we might as well get all as much as we can when we do get something, right? Now the project grows again. Where this usually ends is in a tangled mess of software and organisational processes, tactical hacks and ever-increasing pressure to build more features. The way to get out of a vicious circle like this is to break the circle. There's only one solution here. We have to simplify things. We need to change things to allow us to work in smaller steps. I once worked with a client that had been unable to release any software at all into production for well over 3 years. I worked with them to help them adopt the practices of continuous delivery, of working in small steps and optimising for fast feedback and treating each small change as an experiment to learn from. They went from not being able to release software at all to new releases every 3 months, even for their most intractable pieces of software, and much more frequent releases than that for the rest. One developer told me, "I feel like we've got our future back." It is possible to make this change, to go from protracted, bureaucratic, frustrating approaches that burn people out to a much more dynamic, productive, creative way of working that engages people and produces better results. If you're ready to learn how, I have a course where you can learn about the continuous delivery approach to building better software faster. And I've just added a new bonus section where you can rate your own continuous delivery capability and get a free report from me with targeted advice about how and where to improve your continuous delivery practice. For a limited time, you can also save £100. The details are in the description below. Now, back to this company that made this change for real. Before they started with continuous delivery, each change was fraught with risk and destabilised the work of lots of other people. Changing anything was scary and so slow. So they'd attempted to reduce the risk by increasing their bureaucracy, to the extent that one of the developers that I spoke to had been asked to put a bug that they'd found and fixed back into the code because it wasn't on the plan to fix it when they found it. This is not an easy place to start from to improve things. But the fundamentals are the fundamentals for a reason. It's because they work, whatever the place you're starting from. I advise them to begin by focusing on improving feedback, and to do that by improving things in small steps. This wasn't at all easy. There were technical, organisation and social barriers everywhere that we looked. But this is another reason why it's so important to proceed in small steps. Because after each small step, we can see the impact, good or bad, and we can show the improvement to others and gain some more trust in others to help us to continue making changes. Also, Now we're starting to work more experimentally, trying out ideas to see if they work, discarding the ideas that don't and doubling down on the ideas that do. This organisation, though a big multinational firm, started this activity with a very small group of people. At the start, there were only a handful of them working very closely together. They were committed and so fed up with how bad things had become that they were committed to changing things, and a bit feisty about it too. They aimed to challenge the status quo, and they did. They weren't taking, but this is always how we've done things, for an answer. I helped them to identify targets to aim for that would steer them towards success, and the things that we've already mentioned. One of the main goals was to get feedback on the releasability of their software at least once per day. They started with the simple things like adopting better ways of working for new greenfield projects, creating simple deployment pipelines, establishing continuous integration, and much better automated testing for those new pieces of work where it was easy to add them. Later, tackling the huge barriers like overdependence on manual testing, poor control of test and production environments, and very, very slow planning and development cycles, and so poor feedback for the bigger, more difficult products. As a result of these changes, the teams on the greenfield projects did better immediately. But also, the org was now gaining valuable real experience of this different way of working. I helped with training and coaching and clarifying their vision and their goals a bit, but they did all of the work. There were some good wins and some big setbacks as they discovered lots of dragons along the way. The more complex bits involved, as ever, difficult to deal with legacy systems. For some of these, the builds alone took hours to complete, and even then often failed. Production deployment was complex and sometimes took weeks to commission new versions of software in the field. So the team driving the change did the technical work to stabilise the builds and optimise them and automate deployment. This was hard graft, and the benefits weren't immediately earth-shattering, but they now had a better sense of direction and a way of working, which meant that improvements were clearer, even though small. They were optimising for fast, repeatable feedback, and they were doing this in small steps, all by taking a more experimental approach to change. They'd try out their best theory of how to make the next step forwards toward their goal, whatever that might be, and adapted to whatever it was that they learned from that small step. This surfaced all sorts of challenges along the way. Some of them they knew before they began, some I helped them to avoid, and others were traps that we fell into anyway and then had to find a route to climb out, but using the continuous delivery principles as our guiding lights. The team of change agents made real company-wide difference and never once took a step that reduced quality or efficiency as far as I ever saw. First, they started releasing things from the greenfield teams. Sometimes peripheral products, sometimes really useful additions that made real differences for their customers. Our small team of change agents grew in influence and size as a result, with more and more people willingly joining the push to do better. These teams were now a lot more product and user focused than before too, because there was less bureaucracy and process between them and the real problem that they were working to solve. The teams working on the more difficult big balls of mud inevitably took longer to gain traction. They were nervous of being able to achieve the kinds of speed of feedback that I and the change agents were pushing them to aim for. So they did a lot of work to decompose some of their bigger systems into smaller, more tractable components and subsystems. This is sometimes useful, but always a slightly risky move, because the danger is that you end up with a big dependency management problem after this change. And they did suffer from this. They certainly achieved better insight, better visibility, and a faster pace of change locally by dividing the software into these smaller teams and smaller pieces, but at the cost of losing visibility into the integration of the whole system. Not really any worse than before perhaps, but now more clearly a real problem that they needed to tackle. They came up with a tactical process hack to manage change between teams. This got them to a significantly better place than they'd ever been before. They still had to work very hard to get their first release in several years out, solving lots and lots of organisational and technical problems along the way. But they made that first release. The real test, though, was that 6 months later, they released again, and it was a lot less painful. And 3 months later, they released again, and 3 months after that again, and ever since, again. This company is today releasing new software all of the time. The nature of their business means that they can't do that for all of their software. They still have big complex legacy systems, but now they can work on them with much greater confidence and efficiency than they did before. Now, even for the difficult safety critical parts, they make constant, well understood, observable progress and produce release candidates, if not daily, then at least weekly for most parts of the business. This is not an example of beautiful, theoretically perfect continuous delivery, but then it often isn't after this kind of transition. But this is a real company that regained control of their future through changes to their software development approach. It's a bit grungy and less than ideal in some places, but they are now working on improving these things too. In a series of small steps, optimizing for fast feedback and treating each change as an experiment, they now produce new releasable software, even for the grungier bits, reliably and repeatably on at most a 3-monthly basis, and for most parts of the organisation on a daily basis. This is the impact of getting the model for software development right, and continuous delivery defines the state of the art for being able to achieve that. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy the stuff on the Continuous Delivery channel, please do consider supporting us and joining our Patreon community. There are great conversations going on in Discord right now. Thank you. Bye.